on 95.3 FM in Windhoek, Desert Radio. The Bold Voice.
Studio, you can see my face. You can see Jemima's face, who is joining me in studio now. And we're just about to get into some conversation with her about the Women in Media conference that took place over the weekend. And if you do find yourself on Facebook, we are running a question of the day for you. And that question is, should the Chinatown shopping complex in Windhoek and other shops be allowed to sell counterfeit goods? Should the Chinatown shopping complex in Windhoek and other shops be allowed to sell counterfeit goods? So come on over to Facebook. Let me know what you think. I'll be reading some of your comments later on in the show. And yeah, just with everything going on, I'm super curious to hear what your thoughts are on that. Now, Jemima, let's get into talking about this weekend, right? This weekend, you guys hosted the second Women in Media conference, and it brought together newsmakers and the press to engage on the absence of women's voices in media reporting. Now, Jemima Beukes is my senior colleague and also a co-founder of the Women in Media conference. So good morning. How are you?
Morning, Alana. Thank you for having me.
No, I was teasing earlier that you are not in the newsroom, and this is when us journalists were most giving the diary so we can prepare the newspaper for tomorrow. But Jemima's informed me that she gets to rest a little bit this week.
Yes, my boss gave me a week off.
Well deserved, I think, because at this point we're seeing Jemima's names in the newspaper every day, so we know she's working really hard. But yeah, Jemima, let's get right into it. Just talking about the conference that took place on Saturday morning. Just give us an overview of how it went. Was the discussion fruitful?
Yeah, Alana, it was a roaring success. Well, obviously, we organized it with the aim to have a successful conference. Mm-hmm. But wow, the testimonies and the presentations from some of the speakers were just mind-blowing. Mm-hmm. We've had Polina Elago from SACU there, who shared her journey. We've had Gwen Lister, the veteran journalist, who shared also her experience breaking into a male-dominated industry at the height of apartheid, and as well as Manesha Munyo from NBC, who also shared her journey as starting as a budding journalist into becoming a leader in NBC, which ironically, NBC is a state-owned enterprise, and we know that getting women into leadership roles is usually a challenge. And it was refreshing to see that NBC is really, really doing great in terms of making sure women get into these spaces. Yeah. We've also had Selma Kaulinga there as a corporate expert, communications manager of Nedbank. But I think most importantly was the testimony of, well, all of them were very important, obviously, because we took away so much from each one. Yeah. Like Ms. Elago telling journalists and newsmakers to show up. Show up in the sense that not to stand back and doubt yourself, because that is, in my experience, one of the big issues when, in my observation, not showing up is one of the biggest reasons why we don't see enough voices, female voices in the news. And that is also the biggest reason why we've started Women in the Media. I may be going all over the place.
No, you're fine.
But yeah, so basically Women in the Media was established out of frustration, obviously, about how women, female journalists are perceived. And the fact that we are not trusted, both in the newsroom but also outside. People think you are not capable of doing the hard stuff, and that men are basically given like an easy passage. And we see it every day in newsrooms where women journalists must really fight for the so-called hard beats, for the business beats, for the politics beats. And you see young boys walking in without having to fight. They just say, well, I'm going to take over this beat. And it happens because, unfortunately, we are seeing and unofficial. I don't know, perhaps it is official, given the fact that patriarchy has been in this world for such a long time, brotherhood, and it sustains them. So there's just this safe haven for men when they get into not only the media, we see it also in corporate sectors, especially as a journalist, when you reach out to speak to female experts. They are usually reluctant. And you can see this they don't trust themselves enough very often because there's not a support group. And that is what Women in the Media basically wants to offer, not only journalists, but bridge this gap between journalists and these female newsmakers, so that, number one, we are each other's keepers. So if you as a newsmaker do not know, you're afraid of journalists, and you're afraid of how you may be perceived in the media, you can at least reach out to a journalist that you trust and who you can share your fears with, and who can help you prepare for an interview. I mean, these things happen with male counterparts, and why can't we do it for each other? So earlier I've said what stood out for us, and I think that what has perhaps legitimized the whole conference was the testimony of Namutenya Kangotwi, who shared her experience as a young journalist, and she did a story and that went horribly wrong, and it resulted in the death of someone, and she's always blamed herself for this, to the point that she started drinking, and because of this feeling of guilt. And I realized just how deep trauma is running in the media. And not only, and unfortunately, it's not limited to just females in the media. It is all across the board. Journalists have an overload of information, and we don't, you do, and very often most of the information that you go to a scene or horrible, you are doing a horrible story, you go and you just use a fraction of that info for the story, and the rest of the information stays with you. And we don't have a debriefing culture in the sector. And unfortunately, because we don't have a debriefing culture, men are seen as weak if they speak about their experiences. So you see journalists drinking a lot to numb this obviously pain, because it's an emotional pain. And unfortunately, we are branded as alcoholics. So these are the issues we want to address, because, we also see a lot of journalists leaving because of the frustrations in the newsroom, not making it into these leadership roles, which they know they are capable of, and they are shut out often. And you just, I don't have, facts speaks for themselves. We've had a panel discussion last week hosted by UNESCO of all organizations and NUST. And they have, it was a male-only panel discussion. And the excuse was, yes, again, that females are not showing up. Yes, perhaps they didn't show up. My experience is that that was not factually correct, because I reached out to some female news editors to hear if they were called at least, and some of them were not called. So that was not factually correct, that explanation. But also, UNESCO and NUST, especially UNESCO, who's committed, and it's part of its sustainable development goals to, to promote gender equity. They should have made sure women are on that panel, and unfortunately, it has slipped through. And also, some of the sponsors who were the sponsors of that, it is disturbing to see that these organizations basically rubber stamped. They gave their nod of approval. Obviously, if you are a sponsor, you will see the program. So if you see a male-only panel, and some of these organizations are women-headed, and they've seen a program of of this magnitude, and it was just males, and they're like, okay, it's okay, let it go through. And we are in this 2022, and yet people are still shrugging when we have these kind of things, as if it is not an issue. It is an issue because we are losing brilliant female journalists. They are leaving this industry out of frustration because their work are not appreciated. I, for one, I had to fight to get into the political beat. I remember having had interviews with, attempting to have interviews with some politicians. People would just, no, I don't have time to speak to me. To speak to you. And the next thing I know, one very senior politician called my male colleague to now speak. And I obviously made a very big fuss about this because obviously it was a gender. I mean, it was because I'm a woman. And that's the other thing. If you speak out, you are seen as a crazy woman. I'm seen as a crazy woman because I am a assertive female journalist. We have assertive male journalists. They are not branded crazy men. And we need to seriously address this. And that is what women in the media stand for, to build women. And to support each other, and to carry each other through very difficult circumstances. Since we've started this, I've been called by young journalists who want to leave because of the frustrations, and it's heartbreaking to see these brilliant children. Well, they are children because many of them are interns, and they really wanted to come and make a difference, but then they have to be faced. Then they are faced by these kind of obstacles.
And then I think with conferences generally, a big concern is that we're having these important conversations and dialogues, but how does this manifest tangibly into actuality? So going forward, what are the plans to have some of these issues addressed? Will there be any liaising between women in media and, for example, the Namibian Media Professionals Union to make sure that these issues are actively being tackled?
Yes, absolutely. So one of the things a project we are really working on at this point is, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Quote Her. It's an international organization that is pushing for the female voices to be in the newsroom. So we are looking at establishing something similar here, like a database where we have female newsmakers, female experts, and they are put in contact with journalists so that they can speak with each other, not only when they want to write a story, but just to develop a relationship and build trust relationships. So we are working on that, and we are also in talks with the Namibia Media Professionals Union to organize like a roundtable on gender equity, where we bring in both female and male journalists and just talk about the issues they face in their line of duty. Yes.
And then, another question that comes up often when it's this conversation around gender equity in any space really is that people, especially the male counterparts, question, now, are you guys saying that you want women wheelbarrowed into these positions just for the sake of reaching some sort of parity in that space? Just share your thoughts with me on concerns like that.
First of all, I always ask when they put that to me, I always ask them, are we going to be honest? If we are honest with ourselves and we look around, I know for a fact, and I know that some of these male editors that we have right now, they are not necessarily there because they are there because they qualify for these positions. So why are we not questioning men being wheelbarrowed? Why is meritocracy and wheelbarrowing and competency only becoming an issue when women must be empowered? Men are just, like I've said earlier, you really find that men come into a newsroom, young male journalist. Next thing you know, he's a business reporter. And business is seen as a heartbeat because it is so complex. But journalists are not just pushed into that. I want people to go into newsrooms. I want them to sit in the diary meetings and look for themselves, and they will see. So that is a non-issue in my eyes, because we only have this to undermine the fact that, and we have competent journalists in this country, but where are they now? Some of them, I'm not undermining public relations in the communications industry, because they are an industry on their own, and they have their own competent people. But unfortunately, we find that brilliant female journalists are leaving because of these kind of issues. Unnecessary things, unnecessary hurdles that are put there. Women are competent. I am competent. I have shown my work. My work speaks for itself. So why am I not? I don't want to be an editor. I love my job as a journalist, but you understand what I'm saying. And I know so many others. The other thing is, I know of so many women who are exceptional in their work, But because they are struggling with mental health issues, they are seen as weak. But men are just fine when they drink. Men are just fine when they come late. They can be excused all the time. So why are we excusing these kind of things? And we don't want to have honest conversations. But when it comes to women, we must suddenly all sit upright and have these conversations. So no, in my eyes, it's non-issue. Women are competent. They're educated. The work speaks for itself.
And as you also just mentioned, right, the panelists at the conference, and then of course just the women in media that came to engage, these are all people that are, you know, from different organizations within media in Namibia, right? So what is going to be done to actively empower them or give them the toolbox that they need to start chipping away in their spaces at some of these issues? How are they going to now take the battle from the conference, everything that they've learned, to actually embed it into their space?
So essentially, we are just looking at having a small roundtable sessions during the time, and like I've said, putting people into contact so that when they have, if I don't feel comfortable with doing a business story, I can always call Polina Elago, for instance, and ask her. So I have no clue what are the EPL things are. Can I come to you over lunch and just you run me through this so I can understand this? So we need to, it's baby steps. We need to really start small so we can really build people so they can understand. Very often we understand these things. It's just the confidence. We really need to. Yeah. So when we see, and that is why we needed people at this conference, we needed people who are already out there and who are. And I know perhaps the issue of young, why was there no young people on the panel, may have been an issue, but we wanted to have experienced people, people who can give you a lifetime story, so that we can build from this. So you can, like with Gwen, for instance, an editor telling you belong in the kitchen, so that. I mean, every journalist we have faced something similar. It may not have been an editor telling you that you belong in the bedroom, but it may have been an editor who say you can't write, and those kind of things. Yeah. So that is why we have started with this group of women who have made their mark, basically, who are experienced, who are basically sitting down now, who can take a breath and share their wisdom, their experience, their lessons with younger journalists. And as we go, we are learning from each other on parallel levels.
And also you mentioned Polina Elago, and she's the executive secretary of the Southern African Customs Union, right? If you can maybe just give us like an overview, summary of some of the lessons from her experience that either in your personal capacity, but also just general idea, you know, some of the things that you've been able to pull from her experiences.
I think some of the biggest lessons that came from Polina's presentation was showing up and look good when you show up. Don't try and blend into the crowd. Yeah. And we often see it. Unfortunately, we see it. I think Namibians were I don't think Namibians realize what it means to just see during the COVID time people interrogating the whole cabinet with just female journalists. I don't think people understand the magnitude of that, and that is what we want to see. For years, it was just male journalists there. Women were not; they were always, most obviously, in the softer beats, but we didn't have an opportunity to show up. And sometimes we are given these positions again. The 50-50 quota, it's just there for a quota. So what she said is show up really. Yeah. So when you are put in a position, yes, sometimes you were good in the interview, but practically you can perhaps not able to do it because I know people are criticized. Perhaps their communication skills are not what it should be. Have mentors around you, and that is basically. Some of the lessons we learned that when you show up, try to do a decent job. The other thing was also be assertive. And when she spoke about how she went to the trades ministry and just said, well, I want to be in the international relations field and I want a job here. That kind of assertiveness go to the minister. Well, this thing doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense that people are queuing for days. And there's a question in your mind. Don't be afraid. Go and ask the minister. Make that call. I know when I started out, I was so afraid to make the telephone call. I literally hid in the corner.
Relatable, yeah.
Yes. So these are the things. Be assertive. Believe in yourself. Those are really for some people it may sound like very, very minor issues, but it's confidence is a very, very important trait that you need as a journalist. For a very long time, I was afraid to ask the president questions because, number one, the president responds very condescendingly, and I didn't think I would be able to. I mean, I would have been crushed if he said something very bad to me. So for years, I had to build that confidence to actually speak to the president and ask him a question with authority, and the ministers as well. So like she said, be assertive. So those are some of the very important,
Takeaways, lessons, yeah.
And then obviously don't be just limited to Namibia. Broaden your scope.
Yeah.
Look at other countries and reach out to other journalists and make connections with other people. Don't just be here.
And I think that one is also really important with the mentorship bit, because you don't know, your mentor might be sitting all the way in Mozambique. You just don't know because you haven't tried yet. But all very, very valuable contributions. And if there are any young aspiring journalists, women specifically listening, take heed to that advice. The confidence part is huge. And when you said that, Jemima, it also reminded me of my early days. I used to be so scared to make calls in the newsroom. So literally the whole day you would just see me going in and out because I was calling my sources and didn't want to do it around my colleagues because I just didn't have that confidence yet, right?
Before you shut down, my co-founder Limba Mupetami, who's an exceptional sports journalist. Earlier this year, we had a position for sports coordinator, who's essentially like the group editor, sports editor of NMH. And we said you should apply. And she's like, oh my goodness, I'm not sure. And we said, well, you're not going to complain to us when you are going to report to someone else who you think are less capable than you are, because we know you are a brilliant sports journalist, you know it all. So you need to show up. She applied, she showed up, and she is now that group manager of sports.
I'm snapping because we love to see that. Absolutely. Yeah. And then just to round off, Jemima, what is next for, women in media? I'm sure that you guys are now already planning or thinking about the next conference. So what are the focuses going to be as we work our way towards that next conference?
So, obviously we're looking at a bigger, better, always bigger, better. But we're also obviously looking at including our allies, which are the male journalists, because we realize they need a platform. We will have to work out exactly how we include them. Yeah. And then obviously, like you've said, international, we need to get some international journalist or media worker or expert to just come and speak to us. People who's really seen the world and who's really been through all these things that can share their experiences with us.
Yeah. And then just last thing that came to my mind as well is that I know that at the conference, you guys also held a moment of silence for the late Al Jazeera journalist Shireen Abu Akleh. Just tell us about, the significance of that moment, being at a Women in Media conference and having to take a moment of silence for a woman journalist that was killed in the line of duty.
The story of Shireen is so sad because she could have worked in America because she also has American citizenship, and yet she chose to be in with the people of Palestine and tell their story. Yeah. And for me, that just resonates with me. When I said earlier, I don't want to be an editor. I want to be a journalist. I want to be on the ground and I want to see what is happening on the ground. But it was just really so sad. I think the saddest thing for me was that, we had the Chinatown shooting the other day, and people were saying journalists must wear the press jackets. And Shireen was wearing a press jacket. And it is just sad. When they want to kill you, they kill you. And like we are saying, journalism is not a crime. And yet we see that there's always a crackdown on journalists, and basically the messengers are always shot.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, of course, the life of Shireen will forever be immortalized for women in media and the media in general. I think even getting that news was quite shocking, because in this day and age, you would really hope that instances like that don't occur, but clearly they still do.
I think the saddest part for me was when her colleague was standing by,
Yeah.
and she was. I think I would never that image will just never leave my memory. The fact that she was like, oh, that is so final, and it's so humiliating, because she was lying with her face down, like she was just there, like nothing. And this woman was a torchbearer. She was not a nothing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Jemima, thank you so much for making some time for us this morning. We do appreciate the updates on the Women in Media conference, and 100% as a woman in media myself, the efforts are appreciated, and I hope that this conference induces conditions for us that are fruitful and allow us to succeed.
My English is gone. My data bundles have just gone. Thank you so much for tuning in for me.
Thank you, Jemima.